Hi, I'm Michael DiSpezio and welcome. In this lesson on the immune system, we're going to take a look at the different types of immune cells. The question that lies at the foundation of this lesson is, what are the roles of the different cells that are part of our immune response? But before we get into the lesson content, let's first see what you already know about the immune system. I'm going to present a series of statements, and I need you to decide whether you think they are true or false. Here we go. First statement. The immune system defends your body against pathogens. True or false? Okay, I know that one is an easy one. That is obviously true. The immune system defends you against these foreign invaders, which are known as pathogens. Next statement. Antibodies are foreign particles detected by your immune system. That's one to think about because you have to know terminology here. This is false. Antibodies are the proteins that you manufacture in response to your body detecting the foreign proteins, which are called antigens. More about that later as we go into this lesson. Next statement. The immune system can sometimes overreact, causing health issues. And that is true. Sometimes the immune system gets so revved up that its components begin to cause more harm to the system than helping you out. So we need to be aware of that in certain types of infections and how your immune system responds. In the final statement, there is only one type of white blood cell, also known as a WBC, and that is false. Although you may have heard about two types of blood cells, the RBCs, the red blood cells, and the WBCs, the white blood cells, there are many different types of white blood cells. Now I need you to take a look at this image here, and either to think of or to write down a caption for this picture that includes what you already know about white blood cells. What a great image that is. It is a colored SEM, scanning electron micrograph. And that is an image captured with a scanning electron microscope, and it's falsely colored. And I look at this image, and if I was going to capture it, I'd say something about the white blood cells that I already know, that they have pseudopod-like extensions that can come out and engulf a foreign particle and ingest it and bring it down. And that's what those long streams appear to be that are coming out from the central part of that cell. Now, let's look more at the immune system and the cells that make it up. There are two types of immune responses. One is called the innate immune response. And this innate immune response has various parts to it. One of it, many of the cells can perform something known as phagocytosis, and that's what we just talked about. It's where the cell will send out parts of itself, encompass something, engulf or surround a foreign particle, bring it inside and break it down. Almost like an amoeba, using those pseudopods that come out and engulf possible nutrition and bring it into the cell of the amoeba. We also have cells in our body that are part of the immune system which perform phagocytosis, bringing in foreign particles, consuming them, and then destroying them. Another part of the immune response, that innate immune response, one which is really readily available if a pathogen gets inside of us, is something called inflammation. And what inflammation does is it allows more immune cells and also immune substances and particles that fight infection to really congregate, to begin to focus at a certain part of your body where you have injury or where you have an infection. The other type of immune response is called the adaptive immune response. And you may know this one best as being the antigen-antibody response. And remember, antigens are those foreign substances that are recognized by your body. In response, your immune system will then generate antibodies, which will then join to the antigens and in ways inactivate them or flag them for removal by other parts of the immune system. So we have two parts of the immune response: the innate immune response, which is available immediately and addresses that infection as soon as your body detects it. And we have the longer range adaptive immune response, which involves antigens and antibodies, and it also leads us to a long-term immunity. Now, the cells that are part of these responses are generally white blood cells. And these white blood cells, these WBCs, are varied in their role and they're varied in their structure. Mostly they travel in the bloodstream, so they can get right to the area of injury or infection. But at those sites, they can pass out of the bloodstream and concentrate where they are needed most. Each of the different types of WBCs has a specific function. And we'll talk about those as we look at some examples of these WBCs that form that immune response. The first type I want to mention is called a neutrophil. And the neutrophil is the most numerous of the white blood cells, and it can account for 50% or even more of those white blood cells. They travel mostly in the bloodstream, but they can migrate out of the bloodstream in areas where there is an infection. And these white blood cells accumulate at the injury site within hours. And this white blood cell, or the debris produced and is associated with these white blood cells, forms that white liquidy substance we know as pus. The neutrophils primarily ingest, they take in bacteria and fungi. And when they take in the bacteria and fungi, they place those particles in packets or in spherical type of containers. And what they then do is take another container that has materials of toxic chemicals and they mix them both together. And this way the toxic chemicals kill and break down those ingested pathogens. Another type of white blood cell is called a macrophage. And the word itself means macro, large, phage means eater. And these are the big eaters. These cells also ingest pathogens and microscopic debris. They put out these projections which engulf those particles, bring them into the body, put them in containers, and then add to them different types of chemicals which will break down and destroy those particles which they have engulfed and taken into their cell. They can also ingest cancer cells. So this is a built-in defense that you have against cancer, because sometimes a cell can go cancerous, and these macrophages, if they detect cancerous cells in your body, can go bring that cell or attack that cell, and they can destroy it. The cells develop in the bone marrow, they travel in the bloodstream, and they settle in tissues where they patrol those tissues looking for pathogens. And if they see a pathogen, then they ingest it. Some macrophages can also stimulate inflammation, which means if there is an infection site, they can release certain chemicals, which can change the permeability of blood cells, which allows fluid to collect around there and also to allow other immune cells and immune chemicals to collect in that area. But some macrophages can also reduce inflammation. So you have different sets of macrophage cells. Some can stimulate inflammation, others can reduce it. Another type of immune cell is known as the T cell. And the T cell forms in the bone marrow, but it develops in the thymus gland. Hence, it is called the T for thymus cell. Many of the T cells become generals in the defense of the body, and they control and they shape the immune response. So really, they're in a way the brain center of how your body is setting up a defense against pathogens. T cells in this process assume various roles in helping other immune cells carry on their actions. Some of the T cells can actually target cancer cells and cells that are already infected with viruses. So not only do they help and coordinate the immune response, but some T cells, the killer T cells, can actually target and kill cancer cells or cells that are infected with viruses. Natural killer cells, or NK cells, are another type of immune cell. And they're called natural because they don't need to be activated against specific targets. They're raring to go. As soon as this pathogen gets inside of the body, these natural killer cells don't need to be primed. They can attack and destroy that foreign particle. In fact, they have a very rapid response to some viruses. And this rapid response can happen within 3 days, as opposed to the antigen-antibody reaction, which can take several weeks before you have antibodies that are targeting viruses. The natural killer cells can detect stress cells by their surface proteins. No antibody flags are needed. This is incredible. These cells can actually determine by the proteins that are on the surface of another cell whether that cell is infected by a pathogen. These are another type of cell that help us fight cancer, and they can destroy tumor cells. Mast cells are a different type of white blood cell, and these cells can produce and store messengers such as histamines. And when triggered by an infection or an injury, mast cells release their histamine content. Okay, so what are histamines? Histamines are chemicals that can cause swelling, inflammation. They can cause, well, you might be familiar with allergies, stuffy noses. They can cause different types of symptoms, all to help you fight infection and injury. And the histamines, once they're released by the mast cells, travel in the blood system to the site of injury or infection. And there, they can change the permeability of blood vessels, which allow other immune cells to go out of the bloodstream and to collect in the areas where they're needed. Or they can change that permeability to let other defense chemicals out into those surrounding areas. The B cell is another type of immune cell. And these B cells mature in the bone marrow, hence they are called B cells. The B cell produces defensive proteins called antibodies. Remember, the antigen is the foreign substance. The antibody is what is produced by the B cells that will then bind to that antigen. Now, antibodies can disable, they can mask a pathogen, or they can even alert other immune cells to the pathogen's presence. They do this by binding to the antigen, and they act as a flag saying, here I am, come destroy this cell. This cell is infected, we need you, and we need the action of the toxic chemicals that you have. So these are some of the roles of the antibodies, and which makes them effective in fighting pathogens. Antibodies, as you probably know, are very highly specific. It is a lock and key association that they have with a specific antigen. And this may take weeks before your body builds up a reasonable amount of antibodies to then mask or in some way inactivate the sites, the antigen sites of the foreign invading particles. The dendritic cell is an interesting cell. You can see it has arms here, almost like the dendrites that you know of in nerve cells. And the dendritic cell is what's called a professional antigen presenting cell. Well, what does that mean? A number of immune cells, after they destroy a pathogen, will present parts of that pathogen on their surface to help alarm the rest of the immune system. It's amazing, incredible what this immune system does. But the dendritic cell specifically does that. What it will do is it will ingest a pathogen, bring the pathogen into its cell, use chemicals to not only inactivate the pathogen, but to break it down into small, recognizable antigens. Then it takes those antigens and projects them on the cell's surface. This surface then comes in contact with the T cell. Remember the general that organizes the immune response? And it helps the T cell organize the best defense against these detected pathogens. And there you have it, an overview of some, not all, but some of the important white blood cells that are part of your immune response. So, in summary, let's take a look at what we learned in this lesson. There are two general types of immune response: the innate, which is ready to go at a moment's notice when you get infected with a pathogen, and the adaptive, one which takes longer because you need to build up a concentration of antibodies that will react to the detected antigen. There are several different types of immune cells, and each has its own specific role in addressing pathogens. Some immune cells destroy pathogens by engulfing them, and we call that phagocytosis. And once they get inside the immune cell then inactivates them and breaks them down. Other immune cells release chemicals that inactivate pathogens, or these chemicals pump up the body's defense. They're messages that get the other parts of the immune system revved and ready to go. Chemicals such as histamines cause inflammation, which increases the movement of immune cells and certain chemicals into the sites of injury or infection. And that is it for this lesson on immune cells. I want to thank you all for participating. And if you'd like to find out more about what I'm doing now in science education, please come to my Twitter account at @DiSpezio. Or if you'd like to find out more about science and science activities, please join us at #HMHScience. Thanks again for joining, and I hope I'll see you in another one of my presentations. Bye-bye.